Hello. I am joined today by Tamara Liebman from Calibrate Legal. Thank you for making time to sit with me today, Tamara.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Tamara is my favourite commercial lawyer, and one of the reasons is that she makes quality information really easy to understand and really accessible for SMEs. And the reason that I've asked Tamara to join us is because we see people who are really excited about their product or service, and we see them when they're reacting to stuff. So we know that many of you can do better. And so, Tamara, I wanted you to come and sit with us today to talk to us about what sorts of things we can do when we're starting out that will set us up for success later on from a
Sounds
legal
good.
perspective.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, this is obviously one of my bugbears, is that often people also come to me when when the things are going pear-shaped down the track. And if they had put good systems and frameworks in place at the beginning, then they wouldn't get themselves into a pickle. So yeah, and it's always good. I mean, obviously to know what all the things you kind of need to look at, but also to know to go and get expert advice from an accountant or a lawyer, when anything, is being set up, basically. That's number one piece of advice.
And not just asking, hey guys, should I do this in a Facebook group and see what the answers come out like?
Yeah, absolutely. don't crowdsource your legal advice.
Okay, so say I'm getting started in business. What things should I put in place first?
Okay, so obviously, firstly, work out what structure you're going to be in business and as usually either a sole trader or a company.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going into business with someone else, you could do a partnership, which is two sole traders in partnership. But generally, people form a company and they're joint shareholders and joint directors. And at that point, a lot of people think that all I need to do is register the company on the company's register, and then we're done. But in fact, there's quite a lot of additional paperwork that's required. Some of it, all of this information is available on the company's office guidance. So I'd recommend, thoroughly reading all of that. But one of the key things to remember is you need a share register that is not the same as the details on the company's register. You need to have your share register that says who the shareholders are, and you need to keep that up to date. And then you need to have, if there's more than one of you, you need to have a shareholders agreement. And the shareholders agreement protects the shareholders from disagreements, lack of clarity about responsibilities in contributing to the company, what happens when someone needs to leave, what happens when someone doesn't pull their weight, and that sort of thing. So if you don't have a shareholders agreement, the general law, the Companies Act, doesn't really have anything in it to resolve issues. The Companies Act is just designed for a one director or one shareholder entity. Any more than that, and you need to have a constitution and a shareholders agreement. So, and then shareholders agreements should be tailored because every company is different and every situation is different in terms of what you want to get out of it. So, that is like super, super important. And then also consider relationships and the ownership, the business share ownership, and how it might be affected by your partners. So each of the shareholders and directors might have a spouse, and under relationship property law, they get an interest in the shares unless there's some contracting out agreement that prevents that. And one of the other things that we do sometimes see is spouses getting involved in the business relationship of the people who own the business. So it's important to kind of work out what you can do to prevent that sort of thing happening as well. So, and all those things should be put into written agreements.
Yeah, I think anybody listening to that piece would actually probably shudder at the thought, because a business partnership is like any relationship where it takes work to find your common ground and get into your groove. And then no matter how much you love any external person, them trying to wedge their way in is going to change any dynamic. It's going to change any flow. And I absolutely understand how you could benefit from up front, really, both of you agreeing on whether or not that's going to happen and how. So, gosh, I just thought of it. I'm a business
I
myself these days.
I know. Look, I mean, it can kill a business.
Mm.
And and I've seen it happen. So definitely something to look out for. What else? Making sure that you have protection for your brand. If you've developed brand, have a look at getting it registered as a trademark so that no one else can copy it.
And that in itself is a fairly accessible thing to do, isn't it? Because when you think of legal stuff, you think ching, but actually trademark protection is fairly cheap and long lasting too.
Yes, in New Zealand in particular. In New Zealand, registering a trademark is like ridiculously cheap. You can register a trademark for $70 in one class. Because you can do it yourself, you can do it online, and then that's just the government fee. And you get it for 10 years, and then you just have to renew it for a fee in in 10 years' time. If you want to if you think you're going to be marketing your product internationally or your service internationally, consider budgeting for international trademark protection, but that has to be done in every single territory that you're going to be wanting to trade in. If that is the plan, obviously, even before that, make sure that your trademark's available in those other territories. So that's a bit of an investment. So if you're looking at sort of, global marketing, then a lot of work needs to be done up front to make sure that, those brands are available. Otherwise, you're going to be rebranding, which increases costs down the track. So keeping that in mind. And internationally, almost everywhere else is more expensive than in New Zealand. So it's something to keep in mind. Next, premises leases. Should we talk about those?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a lot of businesses start in the home, but a lot of businesses require a lease. If you're a hospitality or manufacturing or you need an office, then you're going to need a commercial lease. Commercial leases are completely different from residential tenancies. I definitely see in the support groups on Facebook that people seem to confuse them. And while you may have a lot of rights under residential tenancy, under the law, if in a commercial lease, tenants generally have very little power, almost none. And what you do have is clearly stated in your lease agreement or your deed of lease. So considering that leases can, next to labor costs, leases are the most expensive expense in the business, the most expensive overhead. It is always worth getting legal advice on a lease, because if you sign up for 5 or 10 years, if you're putting in a fit out, you'll be signing up for a long time to make it worth your while. And then that's exposure of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So spend a couple of thousand on legal advice so that you can understand what you're getting into, and what you're going to have to do when you want to get out of it, that sort of thing.
And
you will be required to give.
Sorry, I think we have a small delay. So I just spoke over you, but I didn't mean to. But a commercial lease compared with the residential tenancy agreement is a contract, and so what two parties agree to is what's binding, isn't it? So you need to have professional advice and eyes looking over that agreement to see actually what is in there, because wording matters, clauses matter, and it's enforceable, isn't it?
Yeah. And not to say that residential tenancies are not, but they are more heavily regulated.
And they're quite standard.
Yeah, and they're standardized, although commercial leases are also very standardized, because you have maybe 2 or 3 general forms in New Zealand, and most small businesses are leasing under the Auckland District Law Society deed of lease. So there, variables tend to just be, what's the rent, what's the outgoings, and there might be some sort of a few things at the back. But it's still a massively onerous document, and you need to understand what is in it. And it's also not super clear, and there's still it's been refined over the decades, this particular template, but it's still got some areas of ambiguity that are difficult to understand, especially in terms of landlords' maintenance obligations versus tenants' maintenance. And those are the most common questions I get from clients is, wait, something's broken, who's supposed to fix this? And you have to go back into the lease and try to work out which of those, whose job it is to like pay for this window breakage or something. I don't know, something more complicated than that. So yeah, definitely you need to, understand that, and please read it. Please read it in full if possible. I know it's very long. So that's the leases. I was going to say that most landlords will require a personal guarantee. So if you're borrowing from the banks take a personal guarantee. If the company's borrowing from a bank, same with the landlords. Your business might fail, but if the landlord can't get a replacement tenant, they will come after you under your personal guarantee for a lost rent to the end of the term. So it's a big deal.
It's a big deal, and it's quite a good segue to personal guarantees, because when people are starting a business, they often sign a lot of them. I notice in the trades and stuff, when you're getting trade accounts at suppliers, there's personal guarantees for the credit limits and things. And so personal guarantees in the early stages in business, and it's obviously important with loans. How does all that work?
Okay, so I suppose what do you mean? So the personal guarantee, that usually the creditor is going to say, look, we want the owners of the business to personally guarantee the obligations of the borrower or contracting party or buyer, So sometimes they try to bury the personal guarantee in like the fine print of some T's and C's. That's actually not going to stand up in court. So, if you sign one of those, you might get out of it. But generally, I would say avoid signing personal guarantees if possible. See if you can get, I suppose you can, look, if you're new, you're probably stuck with them, but see if you can get them with discharge later. If you've, accumulated a good track record, maybe a couple of years down the track, see if you can get the personal guarantee cancelled, just to get all these sort of potential liabilities off your blacklist. And then obviously there's the lending ones. Well, the lending ones, it's very hard to get out of those. But and then there's also the clawback period. So if you go bankrupt, then banks can come in and claw back money that you've paid other lenders, and it's just like a whole big mess. So if you can, avoid personal guarantees as much as possible, do. If you can't, then just keep track of them and make sure you know which ones you've got and which ones you haven't. And another good reason for this is if you are a shareholder in a business and you've given a personal guarantee and then you might sell out, make sure that when you're selling out, you are getting your guarantee cleared at that point, because you don't want to have a personal guarantee hanging around for a business that you're no longer involved in. Because as far as the creditor goes, they don't care. It's not relevant to them that you sold your shares. You're still a personal guarantor and they could still come after you. So there's definitely a few fish hooks in those.
Yes, and I'd like to just pause there for emphasis, because that's a really big deal, and people do change their involvement in businesses all the time. And when we're setting up and we need one of these and one of those, personal guarantees are kind of a little bit like Halloween lollies, and we just give them out. And so keeping a register of your personal guarantees, knowing where they are and what you've actually agreed to, so that if there's a change, you can fix it when need be. But it's one way of getting around the limited liability of the company, isn't it? By requiring the director to sign a personal guarantee.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And but while we're on that, another thing to look at when you are starting out is whether, if you have other assets like a home, can you protect that by putting in a trust before you start operating? So, because if you sign a bunch of personal guarantees and then you move your personal assets into a trust, then that can be undone, because the courts can say, what they call alienating assets, in order to avoid creditors, right? So you need to alienate the assets first So before there are any creditors that you could be considered to be, avoiding. So, so that's, and go and see a asset protection lawyer to help you with that. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And okay, I've set that stuff up, and now I'm trading.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about my consumers.
You need to understand your obligations as a trader in relation to customers. So if you're a B2C, then you need to know your obligations under the Fair Trading Act. You need to know your obligations under the Consumer Guarantees Act. And you also need to know your obligations under like competition law. So which is sort of Fair Trading Act stuff, but also vis-a-vis other businesses as well. So there's a lot of really useful information provided by our government about this. So before maybe before spending money on a lawyer, go and read the consumerprotection.gov.nz, which covers the Consumer Guarantees Act. Go to the Commerce Commission website, comcom.gov.nz, where they talk about trade practices. Because you really don't want to be having arguments about, returns and things like that. It's just it's a waste of time and energy. Yeah.
And what about when I'm trying to get the work done? Sometimes we've got big aspirations, and so we can't do all the work ourselves, and we want to take on help.
Yeah. So do not hire anyone without a contract. I often see people, I just really need to bring this person in, and then they start working on the contract afterwards. But once the person's in, they're like, I don't really feel like signing this because I don't like it. But you've already got them in your organization. So if they're an employee, well, then that's illegal because you are not allowed to employ someone without an employment agreement. If they're a contractor, it's legal, but it's not good protection for you because without a contractor agreement, there's no confidentiality obligation and there's no intellectual property protection for you. And there's no restraints or anything like that you might be able to negotiate if you did get them on an agreement.
Yeah.
So a contractor could leave and start trading using the information that they've learned from your business, and you would have nothing you can do about it because there's no contract. So have those at the beginning, definitely.
Yeah, and probably prepared in conjunction with an expert.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
With the right rules as well, because we took on an employee, the very first employee that we took on, we were very enthusiastic. And we offered him as a contract, and then he returned it that same day, and that was all very exciting. And there was a threat of action later because he left, whatever. But because there wasn't a 48-hour period between offering the agreement and then him returning it, he didn't have time to consider and get advice. And so therefore that counted against us and things, but we didn't know because we didn't seek advice. We just went online and found a template and went, oh, that looks good. So that was a bit rookie.
Yeah. Did he not have time, or he just didn't think he needed to go get
I think he was just super enthusiastic.
Okay.
Got the agreement, signed it, everyone was happy.
I guess in those situations, it's really good to emphasize to the prospective employee, please take this away and get advice on it. Don't sign it right away. Make it really clear that they've got that opportunity. Yeah. So with employment, there's another great government website, employment.gov.nz, that's got all the real basic information that you need, lots of helpful information. It's got an employment agreement builder on it. It's reasonably employee friendly. So if you want something a bit less employee friendly, but still legal, obviously, then go to an employment lawyer to get that done. And just overall, complying with the obligations of employer/workplace, making sure that you have health and safety in place, health and safety compliance under the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015. There are health and safety consultants. There are employment consultants who also do health and safety. that stuff really needs to be done properly, because there is since 2015 a lot more personal liability on the owners and managers of a business if people are hurt. If there are hazards and if people are hurt, you could be personally liable, and you cannot insure your way out of that. There is no insurance for liability under the Health and Safety at Work Act.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's a policy decision to really drive it home that people need to keep their employees safe.
Yes.
And their contractors and whoever's comes on the work site, and the workplace, including customers. So that's super important. If you're getting a lease, then there's there might be some responsibility on you as a tenant and some on the landlord, but it depends on the nature of the business and the type of premises, and so you need to be careful about who's responsible for what in terms of health and safety between the two parties, because it's about how much control you exert over the workplace. So yeah, it's quite complicated, but potentially really costly, so it has to be done properly. Yeah. Yeah. She's going to stay in her home office now.
I'm so thankful we work remotely. I just thought my husband's in the construction industry, working in plumbing and hydraulics, and that's gnarly. Yeah. So home office is fine by me. Absolutely. So when you're looking back in hindsight, you're gonna be really glad that you got quality advice for anything that you signed, anything that you offered other people to sign. Quality structure for the ownership of your company, the ownership of your assets, the ownership of your IP.
Yep.
One
thing we didn't, I just wanted to sort of jump back a little bit and talk about securities. So which we didn't cover, but a lot of suppliers will take security over your business in relation to the products that are supplied on credit. Yes. So they'll register what that's called a PIMSI on the Personal Property Securities Register, and a lot of people don't realize that this is even happening, and they don't know how it works.
Yes.
And PIMSI, like, they're fine, but you should know that they're there, and because they can stack up. Say you've got a dozen suppliers, they're all chucking their PIMSIs on against you, and if you want to sell your business or do some restructure or whatever, that's all going to have to be dealt with, because it's kind of messy. And your bank is going to register a general security, which is like a mortgage, but over all the assets of the business. It will rank behind a supplier PIMSI, but it'll be sort of ahead of any other debtor that you might, any other creditor that you might have. So, again, if you're going to go look for finance, or you want, you need to restructure, you want to keep all that stuff kind of tidy. So, try to understand what's going on in that department as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to expand on it from my point of view as well, because many situations will be where someone's taken on a big loan to buy a business or start a business through their main bank. They might have tied it up with the house. Your main bank's going to give you really good rates and long terms, and that's all nice and tidy. And then maybe you want to move through the growth phase or take on a new employee, and so you want to take on some more money. Maybe your main bank won't let you extend any further there, but because there's a GSA over all the business assets, then you need to take an unsecured loan, which is backed up by your personal guarantee. But that's where interest rates creep up when they're not secured by assets, and so the lender's taking on more of the risk, and that's where you're moving into the higher interest rate space. And so I think Tamara's point about GSAs and what securities that you have to offer and have already offered is important to know, so that you can make smarter choices. Yeah,
absolutely. And also, I just want, in the category of the PIMSIs, I wanted to mention security, like equipment leases.
Oh, yes.
As well, because they go on there. So make sure that if you're not using the equipment anymore, or if the lease is finished or whatever, get that cleared. Again, just keeping all of that stuff tidy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's quite a lot to think about.
Yeah, there is. I think we could have gone off on tangents on each of those points, and they probably could have each been a separate topic in their own right, because
and we of course haven't actually covered customer contracts as well, which obviously if you're providing, goods and services to customers, you need to have the right contracts in place in order to limit your liability and to it's actually one of the big main ones. Make sure you get paid, limit your liability, that sort of thing. So definitely would go to a lawyer to get those drafted.
Is it B2B?
Yeah, but also B2C. Like, say you're, like a whiteware suppliers. Have you bought whiteware lately? Long set of T's and C's. That they want you to sell it to you with. Because it's consumer guarantees, but there's also some stuff they actually want to sort of overlay on top of that. But also. Yeah, B2B for sure. Yes. Slightly less important for B2C, but yeah.
And one that we talked about, Tamara and I have sat together previously for a Spinach TV episode, but was terms of trade.
Yes.
And so, covering from our perspective, you can actually build in costs of long invoice terms and things. So that you can use finance products that will end up the debtor pays for instead of you, and things like that. But things like debt collection and when payments due and who owns the products until they're paid, and all those sorts of things are built into your terms of trade, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And obviously if you're in the leasing, if you hire equipment and things like that, then you definitely need hire agreements. And you then need to consider whether you should be registering securities against your customers, because you are supplying goods on lease or goods on credit or whatever, right? So you need to have the correct protection, like security agreement clauses in your terms, and you need to understand how you can use the PPSA to register your security to give you that protection that you need. Yeah.
Okay, well, if any of that made your mind boggle, you probably need to reach out to Tamara and start the conversation about how you can get the right processes and policies in place for your company, whether it be structure or contracts or IP protection, those sorts of things, and maybe a chat with Tamara to figure out where to start to make sure that you've got everything that you wish you had in hindsight in the day that it goes that you would have needed it. So I'll leave some information for Tamara so that you can go directly to her if you want to start a conversation. And Tamara, I really want to say thank you, because as I said before, I really value your expertise and you make it really easy to digest. So thank you for making the time to talk to me today.
Well, it was great. I appreciate it too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma.